On one side stood ordinary tradesmen and farmers. On the other, the 18th century British Empire, the most powerful imperial force on the planet. To understand this clash, look at the eastern seaboard of North America. These 13 colonies were economic engines, generating immense wealth. But empires are expensive. Following the French and Indian War, borders expanded massively. To manage debt and defend territory, Parliament needed revenue. In 1765, they passed the Stamp Act. Suddenly, every piece of printed paper, from legal documents to playing cards, carried a direct tax. The colonists responded with a clear demand: no taxation without representation. If they had no voice in Parliament, Parliament had no right to take their money. By bypassing local assemblies, Parliament effectively stripped the colonists of their legal consent. This turned a dispute over tax rates into a systemic crisis regarding who actually held the right to rule. Tensions bled into the streets. In Boston, the presence of armed British redcoats policing civilians escalated a bitter standoff into deadly gunfire, an event quickly branded the Boston Massacre. By the year 1773, political protest evolved into calculated economic sabotage. Hundreds of Americans, organized as the Sons of Liberty, dumped an entire shipment of heavily taxed British tea into Boston Harbor. Britain retaliated with staggering force. They passed what the colonists called the Intolerable Acts, enacting strict laws that even forced civilians to house British soldiers inside their private homes. To starve the rebellion into submission, the Royal Navy initiated a devastating economic blockade, shutting down Boston Harbor entirely. Parliament intended to isolate and intimidate Massachusetts. Instead, they forced the hands of the surrounding regions. Seeing what the Crown was willing to do to a single city, the 13 colonies began to unify against a common threat. Delegates from across the 13 territories gathered to form the First Continental Congress, organizing a coordinated continent-wide political defense. But politics quickly gave way to powder and lead. In 1775, British troops marching to seize militia weapons were met with armed resistance at Lexington and Concord. The first shots of the Revolution were fired. The numbers paint a bleak picture for the rebellion. George Washington commanded a starving, untrained volunteer militia. They were facing off against a highly funded British military machine, backed by the world's supreme naval fleet. To legitimize this seemingly impossible war, the Continental Congress tasked Thomas Jefferson with drafting a formal document of secession. Looking closely at the faded text of this Declaration of Independence reveals a radical assertion that all men are created equal, endowed with inherent, unalienable rights. This language redefined the conflict as a defense of universal human liberty. Every skirmish was now sought to uphold the claim that rights belong to the individual rather than being granted by a king. Washington's army suffered brutal losses in the early years of the conflict. Their survival hinged on a few desperate victories, most notably at Saratoga, which proved to the world that the Americans could hold their ground. That victory gave Benjamin Franklin the leverage needed in the French court. His diplomatic mission was clear: secure a global ally to counter British might. France entered the war, providing an immediate influx of warships, modern weaponry, and critical financial support. This international backing culminated at the Siege of Yorktown in 1781. The strategy relied on a pincer movement. American and French land forces boxed in General Cornwallis on the peninsula, while French naval superiority cut off his escape route by sea. American ideological grit kept the Continental Army alive through years of defeat. But the strict mathematical requirement to actually force a British surrender was foreign military infrastructure. The conflict officially ended in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. Great Britain formally surrendered, explicitly acknowledging the United States as free, sovereign, and independent. But victory presented a new problem. The 13 independent states were loosely tied together, and without a monarch to enforce order, the Union teetered on the edge of collapse. The solution was a new framework for a functional republic, the United States Constitution. Its first words, "We the people," established a radical hierarchy. Ultimate authority no longer flowed from a crown. it rested strictly in the hands of the citizenry. To secure this fragile government, George Washington transitioned from wartime general to the unanimously elected first president. Relics of this era, like the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, remain as physical artifacts of a deeply uncertain struggle for survival. The ideas forged in this conflict refused to stay contained in North America. They rapidly splintered outward, directly sparking the French Revolution and a subsequent wave of uprisings across Latin America. By surviving its first decade with a stable economy and the peaceful transfer of power from Washington to his successor, the new nation offered a radical proof of concept. For the first time in the modern era, a nation of citizens had shown it could govern itself without a monarch.